All right. So welcome, bienvenides, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, and Mabrica. I am, and I think everybody on the call already knows me, but I will do it for the folks viewing the recording. I am Eva Fiallos Diaz, and I serve as the Rural Project Manager for the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. I do use they and she pronouns, comfortable with either, prefer they. I am located on the ancestral lands of the Appalachian and Muskogee people in what we know as today as Tallahassee. And we're so happy to create the space for you and to bring you another rural legal clinic. And I kind of want to just talk a little bit about what those are, just so that we can kind of center on intention. The rural legal clinics were really envisioned as a drop-in type of office hours for advocates and certified sexual assault center staff to come together with legal concerns, questions regarding advocacy work and out in the field. So to facilitate them, we generally choose your topics of interest and to discuss, and those are submitted via just the listserv. Sometimes we'll do like a quick survey to kind of know what topics you're interested in or trends that we're seeing as we do our technical assistance across the state. These are quarterly calls, and they also function for you to have access to our legal team or allied partners that have specialized knowledge in the subject area that we're sharing about. Today, we do have Florida Legal Services staff joining us, and we have Raquel on the line, and we have other folks who will be joining us shortly, including Andrea. And is Jessica joining us today as well?
I think Jessica will be on today. I'm not sure if Andrea will be able to join. I'm just fielding some messages from her. She might have a conflict, but I'm hoping she can pop in at least at some point today.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to make sure to introduce her as well. We'll talk a little bit more about their project. I'm going to talk a little bit about their project, and then I'll let Raquel say anything else that I may not cover. Their agency, Florida Legal Services, has a project called the Florida Institutional Legal Services Project, or FILS. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. FILS, which houses their LAV, Incarcerated Survivors Project. Their project serves individuals who have suffered sexual abuse or harassment while incarcerated in Florida state prisons, jails, other detention centers. And they serve as a legal resource regarding the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which you might know as PREA for short. They also offer legal advice and assistance through the reporting process, grievance processes, and investigation processes, and can also assist with advocacy related to medical, mental health care, and other services for incarcerated survivors. They also work with community partners like us, like our centers, to help connect survivors with support and counseling services that help them heal and help them stay connected to outside resources and to their families. And I don't know if there's, I think it covered like the general umbrella, but if there's anything else you want to say about the project.
Thank you, Ava. I might be having some technical issues today. Hopefully my internet hangs in there. But thank you so much for inviting us to join you guys today. We are always excited when we get to be on calls with this team. You covered us. You did a great job covering our project. As Ava said, I'm Rachel Ortiz. I'm the lead attorney on our Incarcerated Survivors Project here at Florida Legal Services. And yes, we are doing all of the advocacy that Ava described. If you are working with a client who has experienced any type of sexual violence while they are incarcerated, you are free to refer them over to us if they need any legal services or just generally any advocacy that your office is not able to provide. We help to work with them, to work with the facilities on making sure that the facilities are complying with their PREA obligations, on getting them any services that they need, medical, mental health. To that end, part of why we love meeting with you all is because you provide such incredible services to them that I can just tell you are not available to them without your work. So we are so grateful for all of the work that you do with them. They always report to me how much they value meeting with their advocates, how they feel seen. It's a very affirming process for them. So to that end, any assistance that we can provide to you all, I know it's generally a mixed level of experience as far as working with people who are incarcerated. So if you ever have questions about that side of things or need help navigating the facility or questions about PREA or anything, please just reach out and we're happy to help.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I think that's one of the main things that we do on this call too is, we want to resource share as much as possible. We want to let you know that you're not alone in the work, that there are folks, even folks who aren't sexual assault centers, really doing this work and amplifying the voices of our survivors, as well as trying to connect them to needed resources. And then the last thing I wanted to reiterate as just a part of that introduction is that although this is a rural funded opportunity, the information that we share really benefits all sexual assault advocates and other allied partners and professionals working with our sexual assault survivors. So as such, anyone who can benefit is welcome to attend these. I do have a couple housekeeping items I want to mention, including that I mentioned this earlier, but, and I don't know if Raquel is also I think you are in our area. It is storming outside quite hard. And so if for any reason we get disconnected, I have made Jessica Johnston our co-host so that way the call will continue regardless of whether I'm disconnected or not. And then at these meetings, we do want to hear from you. They are meant to be sort of informal, although sometimes we will have a presentation. So this time it's one of those where we don't have a presentation. Do feel free to come off of mute and speak or use the chat feature to communicate any questions or comments. And then of course, if you're watching this as a recording, you can feel free to reach out to us via email. Generally, we will read the questions that you put in the chat out loud so the whole group can benefit. If you have a question that you feel weird about asking, that's okay. You can just anonymously submit it or just private message me and I will share it anonymously. There's really no shame in asking. We can't learn without first acknowledging that there is something that we do not know, and to just vulnerably seek that knowledge and embracing our inner curiosity. And so today we thought we'd open the door or the floor to discussion about letter writing services for survivors who are experiencing incarceration. The Rural Project did recently release a guide or a guidance document on the topic, and we'd like to sort of highlight it as well as discuss the importance of serving this vulnerable population. That guide is a resource for you, and it is available for download on our Coalition Manager site. And I will shortly add that that link to the chat so that you have access to it as we're talking. There is quite a lot of information on it, so I don't expect you to read all of it or anything like that, but just know that it is something that you can reference, and it does have quite a lot of history that kind of shapes why the services are what they are today. To begin, I would like to ask you to participate on a Padlet. And so if you've never used the Padlet, they're kind of fun. I'm going to put the link in the chat as well. And so this Padlet has two questions that I want to hear from you about. The first is, why is it important to serve incarcerated survivors? And the second is, what services does your agency currently provide? And so I'm going to pop that up too and share it on screen so that we can see as people's answers start to come in.
Eva, would you mind just doing a brief, just share how to start typing on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So it's quite simple, but I know that it can be a little confusing if you've never used it. So can you see my cursor moving on the screen? Like when I move it. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So on the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a plus sign inside of a yellow circle. If you just hit, like kind of like hover over it and then hit it, it will pop up a little, okay, there we go. So it'll look kind of like this. And it's like a little text box. And so you can put the subject. And so you can say in the subject, maybe you put your own name. So I'll put like my name. And then it says write something. So I could say serving incarcerated survivors is important because we are all human. And what does your agency provide? Perhaps our agency provides on-site advocacy. And in addition, you can add an image. Like if you have an image like that you'd really like to share of like you out in the field doing a support group, or maybe I know that a lot of programs will use art with their survivors. If you have something like that that you want to share, you could use this feature here. You can upload a file, you can upload a photo. You can also just kind of do a web search for an image. And that can look like maybe letter writing. Like in this case, we do advocacy. So I'm going to look to see if there's let's see what pops up for advocacy images. So that might be cool to have like just a little image that makes my post stand out. And once you're done, all you do is you hit the publish button and it should pop up right up here. And then as folks are adding, I'm seeing that there are several folks already adding theirs. And so this is something I can kind of, they'll move around on the screen as people add theirs. Okay. Was that, were there any like clarifying questions or answers that you need from me? Did that make sense? Okay. It's a really cool tool. I encourage like for your calls or for trainings. It's an easy way to get input. You usually just share a link and people don't need to have an account or anything. They can jump on and you can create a mural. We've done these a lot in the past for other advocate meetings, and you can theme them. Okay, and I see people I don't know if it's slow, it's like slow right now because of the weather, but I do see that people are responding up here. There's like a little 3 dots like jumping around, kind of like when people are texting you. And that's a fairly cool image for advocacy. Thinking about like what we do in order to complete the picture, like the puzzle image is doing something for me because I'm a puzzler. So why is it important to serve incarcerated survivors? And what services does your agency provide? So we've got Jessica Johnston says, serving incarcerated survivors matters because every being is worthy of feeling safe and heard. And we are able to serve through advocacy, and we'll start writing on postcards as soon as our newest submission to OVW is approved and modified, if not approved. Yay! Awesome. Thank you so much. It is important to serve incarcerated survivors because they often go overlooked and are very often survivors of some type of abuse. We provide advocacy remotely for now. Perfect. And this is great because it gives us also a little bit of a lay of the land of like, what are you already doing and how can we amplify what you're already doing? And letter writing really is perfect for remote advocacy. Okay, I'll give it a few more minutes just to see what other answers come in. And I'll also check to see if we have anybody waiting in the, though that's kind of hard to see here. Great. We don't have anybody waiting in the room. All right. And if you're still thinking about it, that's okay. It's kind of a big question. Thank you, Grisela. So Grisela says, it's important to serve incarcerated survivors to give them an opportunity to share their story and heal. And their agency, Abuse Counseling and Treatment, or ACT, is currently providing a support group. Support groups are amazing. And, you know, I generally get lots of positive feedback from folks who maybe were afraid to provide services for incarcerated survivors and started with support groups, and will have come back even years later and say, this is the most meaningful support group that I run. You know, they are always so grateful, and so it like just meaningful, the groups are. So thank you so much for that. Wonderful. So to really bring the message home, I do want to share I'm going to stop sharing this. And if folks add more, I can share them later. We can kind of pop that back up. But we do have a video that I'd like to share. And I want to make sure that the audio, I know that the audio is always a potential not working thing. So share audio. And here we go.
Has to check in with.
Can you all hear that?
And all those people, they all referred to me by my number.
Were you able to hear it when I was playing it, or was it very, very low? Okay, it sounds really low to me as well.
Yeah,
so,
very low.
All right, here we go. Let's try it now.
That advocate asked me what my name was. Because I'm not a thing. Because I'm a person with a name. And the first thing I told her was, my name's Joe.
Joe was one of the first clients I had, and I was brand new, like sexual assault advocate. Most of my communication with incarcerated survivors was through letters. And I would read, you know, these words, and the feelings that they were expressing weren't all that different than any other survivor that I had worked with. You know, the self-blame, the shame, the fear, the trauma, all of that stuff just was very similar to everyone else that I had worked with. The big difference being that, you know, their resources were so limited, and their ability to self-soothe and their ability to seek out appropriate support was
Okay, I apologize for the weather.
almost nothing.
I went to a psychologist. And my plan is that no matter what, am I going back into that cell? Psych says, cell. Put me in waist chains and put me back in the cell. Nobody would let me out.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that are we still seeing the video now? I got disconnected just for a second. No? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And we were hearing it okay though when it was playing? Okay, thank you. Let me reshare screen.
I was on top of my bed. I was on the top bunk. He grabbed my ankle and he pulled me off the bed and proceeded to rape me. And the second night he raped me. And the third. And the fourth. Getting in contact with Jessica saved my life.
Some of the things that I would hear in the letters was just a lot of feeling isolated. And, you know, with survivors who weren't incarcerated, you know, they could just pick up the phone and call. You know, we had a 24-hour crisis line. They could call whenever they, you know, felt like. But with the incarcerated survivors, you know, their access to that communication was so limited. And so there was something really powerful and like tangible about getting a letter, you know, and you could see how hard they wrote or what their handwriting looked like. And then being able to write back, it was kind of this opportunity to be very thoughtful in a way that I couldn't have been on the phone. Like in an immediate crisis, I was able to really be very thoughtful in my responses.
Jessica was my advocate when I was assaulted. She was the person that was my father.
You meant that?
That was a turning point for me. As soon as she told me, I know you've been raped. I knew, without a doubt, and she could have never said another word to me. At that point, I knew that I hadn't done this. After this, I had been treated like a number. And she asked me my name and she touched my hand as a human being. And it really made a difference. My name is Joe.
Okay. So I want to kind of get just like your impressions of that. That's this video is from Just Detention International, and it's a part of how they facilitate their advocate training, especially for advocates who haven't had the opportunity to work with incarcerated survivors. It was the first video that I watched that that really impacted how I thought about the services. And I was, if you're like me, I'm a huge crybaby. So I was like, ah, like I was in tears, and I, it was just really, it was that powerful, right? So what are some impressions or takeaways that you got from My Name is Joe?
Eva, if I may, I was going to share that when we've gone into, as Spark advocates, gone into, so we have an interesting juxtaposition because we serve two counties. So we serve a rural program and we serve Sarasota, and the rural being DeSoto. And so we are met with very different warmth reception from both of those detention facilities. And Sarasota has the funding where they put money into programming. They believe in programming. We got special permission to even do like a bandana project with a support group at their jail, which meant bringing in supplies and art and just things that are kind of like that just showed kind of where they are. And then where we have not gotten such a warm welcome in DeSoto, or like kind of since COVID, it's been a continual holding on to the excuse, holding on to the that there's not enough resources, and so we're kind of having to do things through remote or through letter writing. But it's nice to hear that viewpoint, like that Joe speaks to, about how Jessica was speaking to, like that it's personal, and that you can actually be more thoughtful, in ways that you might not have been. I don't know that I would have. I kind of think I kept thinking of it as a barrier.
Yeah.
And so I like to hear that viewpoint and to go, okay, let's what can we make of what we can do? And just the humanity that's in that video, and whenever we are doing these support groups, we try to do ACEs, so that we try to throw the ACEs out there, and then get an idea of who's in the room and what people gone through and what have you experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And always, every time, it's an environment where society is really quick to dismiss people and see people as trash or as screw ups or as not worthy. And what we, people in our work know, because you have a heart if you're drawn to this, field, or being of service to people. And what you see is that people have gone through hell. People have gone through really tough things, and that is the plight of, their story, and maybe made some mistakes or got put into some rough circumstances, but they're still worthy of feeling safe and feeling connection. And I liked hearing that we can still make a connection with the letter writing, and that could be really personal and could mean so much to, for somebody to experience. So
yeah,
kind of rambling, but there you go.
No. I will say, like, I appreciate that. I think I also have a bias towards letter writing because I am an immigrant, and I came to the US in the late 80s, early 90s, so 89. So like and it was December 89, so 90s. And so for us back then, long distance calls particularly were very expensive and not feasible and not accessible. And so I think that, letter writing became, really important for staying in touch, right? And so I think that, from that perspective, I can kind of zero in on like how this might be important for somebody else who's isolated in a different way. And really to humanize that need to stay connected, to have a link back to home, right? So even if we haven't experienced incarceration, there's enough of like, what other experience have I had that can help me humanize this feeling, this. And then the other thing is that we've all made mistakes, big or small, we've all made them. And I like to think that, we're one bad day, one bad mistake away from a potential, arrest, right? And so that it could be anybody that finds themselves in a situation like that. But yeah, I love that you threw in the ACEs. And so yes, I will. I have a question from Wanda about whether I'm going to share the video, and yes, I will share. I'll share a link to it in the chat shortly. And then to get back to what I was saying, just we all make those mistakes, and so I think that when we think about ACEs, those are the things that make it more or less likely that we're going to make a mistake that is considered larger, right, in our society. But what put us there to begin with? And that's a part of what the guidance document really starts to zero in on and to give us background on, is that there, violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. And, and so when we think about that, we have to apply that across the board. Incarceration doesn't happen in a vacuum. Incarceration is part of systems of oppression that exist that allow violence to continue to happen in our society. And we can't zero in or focus on one single solution or aspect of it as the thing that's going to cure, because that, I call that a Band-Aid approach, right? It's a Band-Aid approach to think that, oh, well, I'm going to take all these people, these throwaway people, and put them here, and that's going to solve the issue. It's punitive, and it's not just punitive, but it's punitive to people who were put in those places to not to commit those crimes, but whose needs weren't met to begin with. And often out of desperation, right, is where we have this. And so I'll say that I'm not going to read or give you the information from the guide verbatim, but that there are facets of the information that I think are important for you to be able to take away today. And so starting with the fact that the United States does incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. And that's according to the World Brief. This latest information from this year, that the current total U.S. population is 1,767,200. And that's even really when you take into consideration our population size and our country's, size, because we are a huge country, right? So, but that's population accounted for. We still have the largest. And, you mentioned how Jessica, you mentioned how the reception that you get in rural communities versus the reception that you get in more urban areas is very different. And what I wanted to say is that by and large, and this is something else that's mentioned in the guide, is that more and more facilities are actually moving to rural areas. And so that, again, is by design, right? If you put these prisons, these huge industrial complexes out in the middle of nowhere, it is harder for people to get out there unless they already live there. And this serves multiple functions. One of them is it creates buy-in, because these areas are starved for work. They don't have a lot of work industries. And so all of a sudden, having a prison facility built in your rural community is a good thing, because it's going to bring jobs, right? And people need jobs. And so you already have local buy-in, and to some degree, maybe not all the way. I'm not going to say not everybody in rural communities is the same, and they're not a monolith, right? So some rural communities will say, no, I don't want that here. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes they don't support these kind of structures. And sometimes it's, oh, I don't want that here. That's going to lower the value of my home, kind of thing. So depending on the community, depending on the makeup of that community. But by and large, we're seeing that, right? We're seeing that land is cheap in these areas. So people are able to come in, buy lots of land, and then build these big facilities in those areas. And then it becomes hard for your loved ones to come and visit you, especially since if you're, and I think Raquel, you can jump in if I'm misremembering this, but with more localized facilities, you're sent to your local facility, but if you're placed in prison, it's kind of up to wherever they want to send you.
Yeah, so there's a difference between the county jails and the prison system. So when you're arrested and pending trial, you'll be sent to your county jail. And I suppose we deal primarily with the prison system, but I suppose there's circumstances where you might serve everything, all of your time while you're in the jail. But depending on your crime and what your sentence is, once you are sent into the prison system, You're going to start at a reception center, which will typically, I think, be more in the region of where you come from. And then their classification staff are going to review all of the information and they will send you to a prison. And that prison can be anywhere in the state. And it's very true, Ava was saying, about the majority of them being in rural communities. And so much of what she just said, you know, really reflects in the individual experience of the clients that you're working with once you start to talk with them about these things. And I wish I could remember the math because I actually looked at this recently. But if you go to the Florida Department of Corrections website, you can find a map of their facilities throughout the state. And it's extremely top heavy. Most of them are going to be up in the northern region. And so, yes, that's, you know, very isolating experience. Very difficult to get travel. And just to kind of circle back to the video, that video is truly exceptional. If anyone wasn't able to hear it, I really encourage you to go back and watch it, because just to echo Ava and Jessica, it really does touch on the humanity of what people are experiencing. And there were a couple points mentioned that I just want to echo, because I consider them to be cornerstones of what I see with almost every client we work with, and that is the isolation, and also just the lack of trust and the inability to be validated as, you know, as a human, but also as through what you're experiencing within the system itself. And, you know, Ava's touching on it. There's a complex answer for that, if anyone can even answer it. There's so many factors at play, but the letter writing guide, Ava did an monumental job of providing background information to kind of set yourself in this world. Because if you're not dealing with it, you don't know it. I certainly didn't when I first started with this work. But that doesn't mean you can't do the work. So I think that it's really helpful to review that. You know, the advocate in the video mentioned briefly that people on the outside are able to call the hotline 24/7. That is so true. There are hotlines inside of the prison system, and there should be hotlines inside of the jail system. But for any number of reasons, people who have been victimized may not be able to access it. You know, for one, oftentimes they're on the wall where the regular phones are. People may not feel comfortable using that phone. They might feel that it's putting a spotlight on them, a target on them, so that other people are going to understand that they've been victimized, which puts them in an even more unsafe situation. Or it might just not be confidential if there's somebody making a call on the booth right next to, you know, I'm saying booth, on the telephone that's hanging on the wall right next to it. And in the prison system, there's a lot of different security levels. And we work with a lot of clients who are in kind of the higher, more restricted security levels, which means they do not have freedom of movement out of their cells. So they are not able to just walk up to that phone and make a call. They can report it on a piece of paper, but they're very heavily dependent on staff. And on the whole, I would say that the general sentiment is that they are not trusting staff, certainly not security staff, but even mental health staff. It's rare when I speak with clients who feel comfortable sharing all of these very personal details about their, you know, experiences of victimization in both inside and maybe, as you're referencing ACEs, you know, what they're bringing into the prison system with them. And I've had other folks tell me that mental health staff, when they do share, tells them that they're not equipped to deal with trauma or deal with assault. So there is just a massive void of resources inside of these institutions and a general lack of trust to share anything of that nature. So for all those reasons, you know, the work that you all do is so valuable and so appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, I know that people have like their reactions to folks who are in prison. I think it's based in fear, right? That's how a lot of this is able to be perpetuated cycle after cycle and generation after generation. But contrary to what is sort of the popular belief, most people who are incarcerated are not being held in prisons. They're usually being held in state prisons, followed by local jails. So that does make a difference. It indicates like the level of crime that was committed. And so that's important to kind of remember. The other thing is that we're not going to talk as much about the immigration system today, but I do think it's important to mention that the United States is also home to the world's largest immigration detention system, and that it's about 42,000 people in 200 immigration jails across the country, and that kind of ebbs and flows depending on which facilities have made agreements with ICE and that kind of thing. And while this detention system is supposed to work separately from the carceral system, it is modeled after the incarceration system, and it does actually often use carceral settings for holding individuals. And so, you know, you can tell the folks who work at these facilities, this person is different than this person, but generally the rules are going to be more or less the same. And so then you have folks who technically haven't committed crimes, because these are civil rules versus actual criminal rules that are being broken, but they're being treated exactly the same. And so that's like a thing where the mentality is being shifted to make you believe that people who are crossing borders are committed federal offenses that they really technically aren't. Like, it's a technicality, but and again, like, please, like, don't let me look a fool out here. If I'm getting that wrong, like, jump in, let me know. But that's my understanding, is that when we talk about people being undocumented, often I'll hear this rhetoric around like, well, they're illegal and they've committed an act that is illegal, and it makes it sound like they've broken a federal law, you know, and that isn't exactly accurate. Am I wrong about that?
No, I would say you're right. I don't do immigration. I'm thinking status crime while you're talking. I don't know if that's strictly speaking accurate, but that's what I think of. You know, your status is what's making you, you know, commit a crime. So a minor who is out past curfew, it's a status crime. Yeah. But just listening to you talk, it reminds me, just circling back to the point about humanity. This was touched on in the video also. The mere exercise of referring to someone by their name instead of inmate is not something that they're typically experiencing on the inside. Everyone refers to them as inmate. They don't really have a name. So I mean, that's the focus of that video, what they centered on, but it's just so true. I think just that small act, you know, it's so affirming. And I think to that end, you know, the letter writing guide also uses such great people first language, but also there's a lot of, you know, jargon in there to familiarize yourself with it. And to anyone who hasn't worked with this population before, I think, you know, it's normal, as Ava touched on, to come in maybe with some pause and some hesitation. And if anyone has any specific questions about that, you know, I'm happy to answer anything I can to make anyone more comfortable. But I will also just say that in my experience, it's just different. Everyone is typically very respectful to me. They're just so grateful to be helped. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Everyone that I've worked with is just so grateful to be listened to and to be treated like a human and to be helped. And it is a complex system where people's needs are not being met, and that can drive people to find unique ways to meet their needs. So I think sometimes, you know, that fuels this hesitancy to believe people for those that are working within the correctional system. But on the whole, you know, they're just people who need help. And so I think, you know, to the extent that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable, I have not really had negative experiences on the whole. People are just coming in very grateful and very appreciative for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and then I think the last note especially for the immigration piece is that to know that there are incentives for law enforcement and a lot of these carceral systems to work with immigration, and these are funded opportunities. So there's money to be had in order for a lot of these facilities to run a little bit more smoothly. I think from their perspective, right? And so there are incentives, and so you'll see that there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that will sign on to work with Immigration's Custom Enforcement or ICE on these. And so it's important to know, because if you're going to help survivors in your communities access services and really do safety planning in a way that is meaningful and that is person specific, you have to know what things might impact that individual, including what the makeup of your community and those relationships with law enforcement and immigration look like.
Yeah, I would just jump in for a second, if I could, Ava, just to go back kind of to Jessica's point, and the point you're making about the relationships with different law enforcement departments and immigration. I think that kind of goes back to this question of the rural location and the different experiences in one county's jail compared to the other county's jail. Some have the experience, some have been doing this right for a long time, and they're familiar with the standards and what they're supposed to be doing, and others are not. For others, it is new to them. Or maybe they're small and they do not deal with, reports of sexual violence frequently. So that experience is new to them. So I would encourage you as advocates, sometimes your role is to educate the facilities about what's supposed to be happening and how they're supposed to be responding in these situations, because I think that is certainly not uncommon, especially the more rural and the smaller populations that you get to, that the people who are supposed to be running the show might not be completely up to date and familiar with how they should be responding.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think that the other thing that the guide really zeroes in on is some of the history behind the judicial system in the U.S., including how it's racially biased by design. And so in these oppressive power dynamics, rape is and has always been a tool for subduing, a tool of power and control. And this power and control is really baked into how the carceral state functions, originating with things like colonization and slavery. And so I think worthy of mention are some of the examples of how this played out historically, including the forceful removal of resources and people from their lands. And here I'm really zeroing in on indigenous communities, followed by the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which led to what we know now as the Trail of Tears. And this was something that's very important to us because we live in the area, we live in the South. The slave patrols, the Black codes, and Jim Crow laws. And so the Sentencing Project reports that Black men specifically are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men, and Latinx men are 2.5 times as likely. And this pattern really is duplicated among female populations. And this was something that came up several times during the research. And also, a shout out to Florida Legal Services, because they were really instrumental and supportive of the guide. But that women also constitute a growing number of those behind bars nationally and specifically in Florida. And that's, you can look up, you can research it yourself, you can look at the guide. There's lots of resources linked in there, but the Vera Institute of Justice is one of the folks who we referenced for that information. And then Florida, just compared to other states, we do rank really high up there in terms of jail. So we're ranked 10, so of the whole entire nation. We're ranked number 10 for jail admissions and pretrial populations, jail sentence populations, prison admissions, and prison populations. And for almost all of those, we're actually slightly above, we're 5, 6, 7 in place in that 10 place. The one that we're pretrial populations were 4th place in, and then I think the other one that was really surprising to look at was jail sentence populations. We were 5th place in the entire nation. So that's significant, so when we say as service providers, no, we don't have services for this population, or that's not what we do, where we get this kind of idea of if you know me, you've heard me probably say this before, and it's like one of my least favorite things to hear from organizations is like the idea of mission creep. Like, oh, well, what does this have to do with sexual violence? What is like, nah, this is like, we're kind of, our mission is creeping into other, and it's this idea of like, we stay in our lane, this is what we do. You know, we're not like the carceral people, we're these people. And it's like, yeah, but unfortunately life is complex. And like I said, you know, we're not here to do band-aid solutions, right? Which really means working alongside other people in the fight against violence. And that's going to include all our people, right? Including folks who are going to hopefully re-enter community and be a part of it. And we want them to be healthy, and we want them to be safe, and we want them to have their needs met, so that the chances that they'll have to get their needs met in other ways is lessened, right? So we're doing harm reduction where we can. And then, you know, some of us, right, we all have different roles, and that doesn't mean that we all need to be like abolitionists, you know, although I hope that you will see the reason for it, and that you will know that it's an important part of our movement building, right? Abolition is, because the point is that if we're here to really work on the issue of anti-violence, then ultimately we're working also against the carceral state in to some degree or another, right? Because we want less people in jail, we want less people in prison, we want less people in detention overall. And then, like, really to speak to the services, I was really happy with and want to echo back some of what Jessica and Raquel said about letter writing and the impact, right? So if you've read anything about emergent strategies, one of the core concepts of emergent strategy is that small is all. And so what we see on a small scale often is reflected in the macro. And so sometimes we think we have to do all of it. We have to do everything all at once. And really, small steps can really have a huge impact. And so that's what we were hearing Joe say, right? Just the act of somebody using my name versus like some number or the you know, inmate were things that deeply impacted him to a degree that he still remembers them at his core. Like, he still gets emotional about them when he retells those stories, because they were so significant. And so that's kind of what we want to do. So while being held in detention or in incarceration, letters are still the primary way that people communicate with the outside world. And unfortunately, a lot of carceral systems have moved to further limit this type of communication in many ways. And so, but the loss of physical letters from supportive networks outside of detention constitutes the hugest loss. And I do want to show you another video, and hopefully the storm looks like it's passed, so I hope that the video won't be as wonky, but I will share the link to it as well. And this one really talks about the movement to protect prison mail and why that's important. And so we'll take a look at that. And let me put up the volume.
Text appears. Right now, incarcerated people are being deprived of letters, cards, and photos sent by their friends and loved ones. Prison officials claim that allowing mail is a security risk, and specifically as an entry point for drugs. In fact, denying people their mail doesn't make prisons any safer, but it does have devastating consequences to the mental health of people in custody. We spoke with 4 formerly incarcerated people about the importance of prison mail. Martin, a Chicano male and a formerly incarcerated person, sits in his apartment.
Nobody ever thinks about really the how much the prison actually produces trauma, right? There's violence, there's assault, sexual assault, there's suicide, there's so many things that we have to see as incarcerated individuals. That there's 3 things that really unify us to the outside world. And that thing is, those 3 things are visits, phone calls, and mail, right? And a lot of times visits are really hard because distance, right? So you can't visit with your family as much as you'd like to. phone calls, we know that it's very expensive. I talk to my daughter twice a month. That's $35 right there. Just those 2 phone calls for about 15 minutes each call. And the one thing we look forward to on a probably 2-3 times a week is our mail.
Joe, a white male and a formerly incarcerated person, sits in an office.
For me and many inmates like me who don't have family members that can afford $500 phone calls every day, it is the only connection to outside. And that's really kind of important.
Johanna, a mixed-race Native American woman and a formerly incarcerated person, sits in her apartment.
To be able to go to your room and to pick up a piece of mail with your address, your mother's address, your children's address, on that piece of mail with the envelope, it reminds you and takes you back to the place where you want to be.
Troy, a black male with short black hair and a formerly incarcerated person, sits in his apartment.
I love that I was able to correspond with people that care. And sometimes when you're in prison, you're alone. You're very alone.
I remember multiple times, I mean, for a long time, really, for 3 years at a time, watching my daughter grow up in pictures that I got through the mail, be able to hold that picture, put that picture on my locker, put that picture on my locker, be able to hold it, look at it. So I remember I was blessed that my mom was able to be alive when I came home from prison. And the thing about my mom is she always wore this distinct perfume when she was alive. And, there's a hint of that smell on the letter. It was like something that just kept me grounded while in prison.
During the time period that my mother was able to write to me, I kept those letters inside of my pillowcase. I slept with that mail. Many of us keep letters and photographs inside of our pillowcases. It's the closest thing to us. We know that that's a comfort through the night.
It's like a daily thing that you stand at the door waiting for the mailman to go by. It really sucks when he passes you. You got to kind of stay in touch with what's going on outside. And without mail, you don't, period. You watch TV commercials and you're so disconnected from reality that without a personal touch through the mail, you become a number. You can put those letters on the wall. You can tape them to the wall and you can see the good messages from family or friends.
One program that prison officials use to deny incarcerated people their mail is called MailGuard, which is run by the private company Smart Communications. Under MailGuard, incarcerated people can only get mail on a kiosk, screen, or as a crude printout. The originals are destroyed.
An electronic mail, to think that somebody goes in, that to me, those are like sacred items. Somebody goes in, scans your picture, and then all of a sudden destroys it and or gets rid of it in a way where it wasn't touched by my family and then given to me, right? There's a disconnect right there.
I think what's lost is a personal connection.
When you receive mail, you know that the person who has written you has touched that mail. And there's a bond there with that piece of mail that you can't get on a video screen or from a carbon copy. And for most of us, when a letter comes from home, that's home. And there isn't anything that can replace it. Nothing.
Out of the 2.3 million people locked up in America, 90 to 95% of them are going to come home someday. And they need something to unify them to their community. And when I get these letters, that's me. That's me. That's all the people that are nationwide doing that work to try to keep our brothers and sisters inside connected to the outside world.
You can help ensure that incarcerated people get their mail. To take action, visit www.justdetention.org/protect-prison-mail. #ProtectPrisonMail. The Just Detention International logo is displayed on the screen.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I was informed that it was a little choppy for some folks. It was playing directly here. So it did play well this time on my end. However, sorry, commercial. I did put the link, and I think the take-home message is that folks said that these were formerly incarcerated individuals who were talking about their experiences with receiving mail and what that did for them. And so just kind of zeroing in on the fact that it helped them stay connected to their families in a very real way, because they knew that those letters had been written, that they had been touched, and sometimes even they had smells that reminded them of the family. And some people talked about how even seeing the address on the envelope when they looked at it reminded them of where they wanted to be, where they wanted to go after they were out. And so when we think about that as therapists, as advocates, we know that those are also grounding techniques that we use for mental health purposes, right? And so they're things that calm the nervous system. So even though these folks don't know that that's what these letters were doing, they were healing. They were healing techniques that their bodies and their minds just kind of intuitively knew were important. And so when we talk about what's lost in creating this digitized version of letters that destroys the original, somebody said that having those letters destroyed to them is like destroying something sacred. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that having something that somebody poured energy into, scanned into like, you know, into a system, and then, you know, you get like a kiosk, like digitized version is not at all the same as what you would have gotten. And so any like just impressions or feedback, thoughts, comments on that part of it?
Eva, to borrow from you, the term that you've been, which I really resonates, is that, you know, by design. And, you know, it could be argued, hey, this is about functionality. This is about, you know, about efficiency in our organization. And this is why we're doing it this way. Or maybe even argue, oh, hey, this is about accessibility, right? It's the kiosk. Maybe something's not getting lost. There's going to be language. There's going to be reason around why it's, why it should be enticing. And it also, you know, it takes away a level of work, right? Maybe somebody's not sorting that, or maybe that's not, but to the point of being, it's another imposition. It's another way of using like fancy language to cloak, you know, another stripping of things that make, you know, people feel real or connected or human. Because, you know, I think deep down, a lot of, you know, even though you get a lot of performative, hey, we rally behind this healing model, or we're here for it, or we like that. You know, it's one thing to kind of say those things, and it's another to implement. And it can very, very, very easily be put a certain way so that the effect can happen where people and survivors and are losing more of their humanity, or losing more of rights, you know, or being treated in a way that's you know, inhumane, you know, in a lot of ways, just stripping the things that bring feeling. And that thought just keeps coming into mind of by design, you know. And it's tough to digest, and it's hard to not get angry, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and unfortunately it's, you know, I think, and I see Raquel unmuted, so I was going to say that you know, it used to be that the reasoning was, oh, because of contraband, right? Contraband including drugs. And so that was mentioned in the video that they were doing it because of they didn't want drugs coming into the prison. But more generally, they talk about contraband too. And then the pandemic really did a number, because all of a sudden everybody was so scared that the disease was going to spread. And honestly, the disease was going to spread, especially because people weren't adhering to what public officials said needed to happen on a large scale for long enough so that it wouldn't. And so we know that it was rampant inside, facilities, but also outside. And then, so that was weaponized as the new reason. And so it really happened quickly after that. I know it was in motion already, but many people, many places were moving to this type of system prior to the pandemic, and it just kind of got justified by this public health need. And so for us in Florida, it was that Rule 33-210.101 that went into effect on November 29th, 2021. So it was the year of the, that's the year after of the pandemic. But that there was an implementation plan, and that implementation plan wasn't for it to happen all at once, because it would have overwhelmed the systems needed. And so the first pilot sites that kind of got it were Calhoun, Lottie, Polk, Martin. Yeah, so those four correctional institutes at the time. I'm gonna let Raquel jump in.
No, I didn't have anything brilliant to add. I was just listening to Jessica speaking. It was just reminding me too. It's another aspect of privatizing the incarceration of humans. It's, people's families are paying money for the electronic stamps. It's a private company that is digitizing the mail. And we've heard so many folks, especially in November of 2021, when this was implemented. I mean, this was such a big deal to everybody, as you can imagine. And we've received a flood of letters to us asking about this process. So it was just, as a legal advocate, non-mental health advocate, it's just so interesting to me, Ava, to hear you frame this as what it was, the grounding aspect of this, the coping mechanisms of all of this. It's in my mind, it's very sad that people aren't getting the photos, the pictures their children are drawing them. There's so many problems that you'll hear about with how this is rolling out sometimes, if they are receiving the printouts, if the kiosks in their dorm aren't working, 1,000 different reasons. I just wanted to share that thought.
Yeah, and I mean, that's important for us to know too, because even if this is the way that we're doing mail now, right? There are things that we can do if they're not receiving it. The idea is that, like, for example, if they have a legal right based on these rules and regulations. And so if the kiosks are broken, for example, and the rule is that it has to be printed out and it has to be provided to them in a printed version. But we know that sometimes these folks just never get their mail. So that is something that, as an advocate, to start building rapport and trust, we can work on with them, right? We can ensure that they're getting their mail, and so even when it's a small thing, like showing people that you care and that you're there for them, then they're more willing to talk to you about the things that feel more vulnerable, that feel a lot more scary to really start talking about. And so we know that there are many reasons for writing to incarcerated survivors. And so I want to be like, okay, what are some that you all can think of? And I can definitely share some. They're also in the guide. And so we can talk, but think about like empowering survivors. What are some reasons that we would want to open that line of writing, of pen paling with them? And I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well, if you want to chat your message in, either one-on-one or to the group. Okay, so somebody sent me decreasing survivors' isolation. And yes, we talked about that throughout the beginning of the presentation, right? That, you know, we know that these centers are by and large being moved to more rural areas, that, you know, there's already a sense of isolation because you're encased, right, in this facility. You're very limited in terms of what you can do and can't do. You're not even referred to by your name. And so that starts to sort of like not only dehumanize you, but also make you feel like you're very alone. You're very alone, and it's just you and the guards, the rules, and following them or not following them and getting in trouble. And then also being on edge because you don't know whether you can trust all the people around you. You know, and that's an additional barrier, right? It's just like when we're afraid, our systems are constantly in alarm mode, which is a way that a survivor particularly would have difficulty because they'd be in flight or fight almost constantly inside of these facilities. Okay. And it's okay. I know it's a Tuesday and the weather is not on our side today. So I'll give you a few. Raquel mentioned, and we mentioned as well, PRIA. And so another reason for communicating and letter writing with a lot of our survivors is just ensuring that that they know their rights under PRIA. Right. They are supposed to be provided, and sometimes some facilities may do a really wonderful job and some may not. They are supposed to be provided information about their rights under PRIA. There are certain rules and regulations around the type of education that they're supposed to be provided when they first enter facilities. Some have sort of created systems for this, and so maybe they get played a video. Sometimes they'll have an orientation period and that it'll be covered during the orientation period. There's also PRIA brochures that can be provided to them, but often this isn't, you know, sometimes it's like a footnote in the whole process, and really what's covered more what the rules are of the facility and what they're expected to do and their, you know, behavior. And so it may, even if it's there, it may be not highlighted as super important. And so one of the things that we can do is we can make sure that they know more. We could even send some of those brochures as part of what we do. And there are different types of mail, again, covered in the guidance document. Advocates by and large have, you have what's called confidential mail. The language differs depending on the state, but we do have, and I think here it's called privileged mail. No, or that's well, anyway, there's legal mail and then there's the mail, and Raquel, you can let me know. It is covered in the guide.
Yeah, I have to double check. It's one or the other,
yeah.
But you're right.
There are two types of mail. One is legal mail and the other is like our privileged or confidential mail. I think it's confidential. And so confidential mail, unfortunately, is still opened. The difference is that it's supposed to be opened in the presence of the survivor or the incarcerated person. However, again, to me, that's not confidential. They're supposed to only read the header and the signature. I don't know how, as a human, you look at a piece of paper and you don't actually read any contents. Like you just look at the header and footer. Like you can, but it's not like your eyes just turn off the rest of the information that's on a page, right? So I just kind of want to highlight that. When it is legal mail, however, it isn't opened, is my understanding. It's not open. It goes directly.
No, that's not true. Actual legal mail is still open, but it's open in front of the client.
Oh, okay. So it's the same.
It's the same process you're describing. Yeah.
So, I mean, and legal, you know, so that is hard because it's like, how much are they going to actually want to share about their sexual violence? I do get letters that are pretty clear about, you know, I'm being harassed. It tends to be more about inmates that they're in spaces with and less about staff. And so you can see how this would really, I think, disadvantage them and also not, I'm forgetting the word that I want to use, but it would not encourage them, right, to report staff that's misbehaving or breaking the rules around relationships with. And I don't know if any of you are big Orange is the New Black, but I tend to think about those shows a little bit and how not good they are about promoting what these things look like on the inside. I see Jessica Burgos is like, yep. Because it almost makes it seem like a lot of people enter these relationships like they're kind of sexy and they're like, you're interested in doing this, that it has all these perks. And it's like, yeah, that's still power and control, right? Like if you're at the point where you have to make these kind of concessions and to enter a sexual relationship with a prison guard in order to get your needs met, that's problematic. And so then you have women who come in not pregnant, end up pregnant in the facility, and there's like no questions about like how this happened. You know, like we do know enough about pregnancy, right, and how it works. And it's like, so it is a problem. And you know, having people oh, okay, Jessica says she lost me. Can you see me? Can you still hear us here? So everybody else froze for me on the screen except for Jessica Burgos. But hopefully I'm back on here. We were talking about Orange is the New Black. And yeah, the connection is going in and out a little bit. It's not, I feel like it's not on my end anymore, but it could still be Zoom acting funky. So I was saying that just okay, great. It was just quick that you know, folks end up pregnant in these jail facilities, and sometimes there aren't questions asked even though the person was not pregnant. You know, there are medical interventions and exams that people have where folks would know this person wasn't, for example, pregnant when they entered our facility and is not pregnant, right? And so in Orange is the New Black, that's treated kind of like, oh, well, she wanted to have this relationship with this individual. And I was saying that, you know, that's still a power and control relationship where you have someone who has a lot of power over you. It's kind of like when we look at relationships between people who are much older and much younger. And so it's kind of the same concept. In addition to just ensuring victims know their rights around PREA, it can provide confidential services that are not funded by the carceral facility. And so they are going to be a lot more likely to trust you, to speak with you. What I've seen a lot of folks do, which works a lot better, is if you can kind of like team up with faith-based services that come into the facilities, sometimes that is very helpful. Faith-based partners can sometimes they can struggle with the more like mental health aspects of the services, but have like access. And so often like forming some kind of reentry coalition or working with those partners can be a way to kind of like backdoor entry into a lot of the facilities. We can also advocate to ensure that victims' rights are upheld. We mentioned that a little bit, and not just under PREA, but some of the others that we've been talking about. For example, they're making sure that they're getting their medical services, making sure that they're getting their letters from their family. We can accompany them with any forensic exams that they have to have conducted. We can provide just hope, validate their experiences. We can provide psychoeducational support. And so they're, you know, they don't have access to a lot, but they do have access to books. They do have access to information. And so we can make recommendations. One of the things that we've done with our project in the past is we've bought books to add to the jail and prison facilities libraries. And so we're able to then say, well, we provided these books, check them, you know, check out the book from your library, because it was a partnership and technically, like a lot of these facilities, they don't always, they have budgets for these things. but not a lot. And usually they're not going to be ordering books on like sexual violence often, or workbooks like that. They can if it's requested by some of their own internal mental health staff. And so that's one of the things that we took really seriously, is we had a couple of folks telling us that they didn't have access to books that might help them sort of do some of the healing on their own. And so we were able to write into our grant some funding for books. And this was not this current project, but a previous one. But thinking about that, thinking about how to spend funding when you are creating new grants or new projects. Of course, therapeutic services, and then also linking survivors to services that they can access both during detention and then in reentry, so that they're linked up to services when they do reenter community. Are there any others that you can think of, or any questions that you have for us about letter writing, or even just getting started, really?
I just want to add a couple thoughts while folks are thinking on any questions, just to touch on things you said, Ava. To the extent you have a chance to speak in person with your client or meet with them on this question of whether they're comfortable using the mail, we always like to try to take that opportunity to ask them, do you feel comfortable if we communicate with you through mail? I think you'll get a variety of responses. Some folks will write absolutely every detail in the letter and they're not concerned, and other people are a lot more paranoid or don't feel safe doing that. And at least for the prison system, people do generally, or they're supposed to be handed, and I think typically are, a very small brochure about their rights after they have reported an incident of sexual violence. And I guess it's a mixed bag, but I think often are offered a victim advocate. What I have noticed is I am not sure people understand what that means. I don't know that they know that you can accompany them to the SANE exam. And I also think sometimes people are not aware that it is a person who does not work at the prison. I think if they knew that, they would be more likely to use your services. But it's obviously a difficult question of how you get that information out there if they're not reaching out to you or they're not choosing that option. So I think, Ava, you were saying this, but at least on my side, cut out when you were talking about building relationships. If you were referencing the PREA coordinator at the facility or a contact there, I think that would be a great opportunity, to the extent you're able to nurture that relationship. I think that could maybe help that person, that employee might be more willing to spread that information or provide a little bit more detail or refer you directly if the person if the victim is refusing initially just because they have a lack of awareness.
Yeah, and if you're already providing other services, let's say like the survivors support group, it may be a good avenue for getting some of that information out in a way like that's in person. And so you can say like, here are other services that we provide. And so kind of doing that on an ongoing basis, because we know that there's a lot of rapid movement within facilities, having people move in and out of them. And so just kind of like building that into a little part of like your intro, we are such and such agency, we provide these services. And then we also, this is an older resource that we have, but it does have a story about an incarcerated survivor in it. And so we created with our last project a comic book that addresses a couple different survivor stories. That is available on our website. And I believe we also uploaded it to Coalition Manager. This is the English version. And then we also do have a Spanish version of it. It's called Heroes Among Us. It's silly. It was, but it was really neat and kind of a dream come true to create a comic book. It was supposed to have originally been a fotonovela, but one of the things that we talk about in the guide is that you do want to be mindful about like access. And so access relates not just to the languages spoken by people, but also the levels of education, the language that you use, so that folks can understand you and understand the services. And I think that Raquel was really speaking to that sometimes terminology that is really simple for us, you know, they might not understand. Like when I say even like things like advocate can be confusing in Spanish. Like a lot of folks will say things like defensor or defensora, which tends to invoke like a sort of like lawyer attorney kind of relationship that isn't there. And so it becomes really, really important to kind of have to explain, right, with extra language, like what it means, like what do you actually do? So I think that that's kind of a side note based on some of that information shared. But I think this is a really wonderful tool that you can have them look at. There are worksheets and included inside of the book, so you can kind of use it with a support group and like read through the stories and then answer some of the questions that and I know that Dina and Grisela have both used this tool in their communities. I don't know if you guys mind like jumping in and sharing a little bit how you use it.
Sure. So Grisela and I are located in Hendry, Glades area, rural counties, and where we actually have the opportunity to go into the jails, in both county. In Hendry, we do support groups in person, every Fridays, and we do utilize the comic book. It's very simple. It's not that, you know, complex for them to understand. And they love, you know, seeing pictures rather than words. And it's something that they're able to connect with. And we, you know, love it because it has open-ended questions on there, just to check in to see if they're, you know, chiming in the story. And we try our best to have them at least connect with either the story, either they know someone that went through something similar or themselves. So I think that the you know, letter writing as well as the comic book is a great tool to use, therapeutically too, because it gives a sense of, you know, motivation, as well as letting them know that, hey, there's, you know, other things that are going on, but they're not the only ones going through something like that. Especially when someone's incarcerated, you know, nobody wants to be there. So, but that's pretty much what I want to share on that end. I'm not sure if Priscilla wants to add on anything that I might have left out.
I think Eva's been going in and out, guys, because of the connection.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here.
Yeah, we could hear you. We can see the comic book. So.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would. So I popped it up on screen just so you guys could get a visual of it. This story in particular, because it was kind of the predecessor to writing the guidance document. It started here, right? I was hearing some of the success stories that people were having with letter writing in their communities, and so it really inspired this story. And this is actually the story of a woman who's incarcerated, but was a victim of human trafficking. And so it's, you know, but couldn't communicate what had happened to her and wasn't getting the services that she needed to really sort of let folks know what had happened to her. And so we use this story just kind of like as it isn't always the typical story, but it is one of the stories that we in the advocacy field do come across quite often enough that several of us had had similar situations and wanted to tell this particular story as an amalgam of stories that we'd heard. And so but I think it's a nice one to read. It starts with a synopsis of the story, includes some facts that were accurate back then. So, you know, this is an older publication at this point. And then the actual storytelling. And so you'll see that there's an actual letter that she's reading from an advocate, and it's available in both Spanish and English. And it's just a neat story to kind of if you want to sell this idea to your programs, to your leadership about why letter writing is important, maybe at a staff meeting, you can lead a small group and talk about this story, read the story together, answer some of the questions that come up, and talk about how the tool can be used. And then also like, hey, like, how could we start this on a really small scale? So that's the English version, and we have the Spanish version available as well. And yes, we did the painstaking work of creating the images. I worked with a local artist in town, and he was very kind to us in changing a lot of this stuff out to make sure that it was accurate, both on the pictures. Because I hate when you're looking at a comic book and even the Spanish version has the letter in English. And so we wanted to make this truly different. And this image reminds me a lot of what Joe said, or some of the others that spoke in that second video that I know was a little bit wonky and in and out, but about the feeling that people get when they know that they have mail, right? Like how it brings a lot of hope and it makes them feel remembered and like people. And so this was something that we were trying to evoke from our staff, and then also from our participants, that they matter, that we hear them, that if they write us, we're going to write them back, right? And it is something that we talk about in the guide, but also remembering not to overpromise, that these folks are very vulnerable, and so you want to be as clear with them about what you can do, what you can't do. If there is a potential that there might be a delay in answering answering them at any point, like let them know that, right? Let them know that, even if it's a really short letter that says, I'm going to write you a more, a longer letter in response in order, but look forward to that letter in a week or so. So just so that we start to build that trust with them and know that they really can count on us. And so we have the discussion guide, and then we also include code, like main words, or I think we call them keywords at the ends of our or a cheat sheet, so that we can look up certain words that might not be as well known if you're new to advocacy, things like LEP, or even like Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, those kinds of things, so that you can also, it functions as an education tool as well. All right, so that's really it for our call today. We're really proud of the work that you're doing. You serve, really, those of you who are already doing parts of this serve as a resource for the rest of the state. And we want to encourage you to reach out to us if you need help, if you need assistance with getting started, if you're facing challenges in what you're already providing. We heard from Jessica Johnston about some of the challenges in DeSoto County, and it's not that they don't want to, it's sometimes the facilities are very small and understaffed, and so something like letter writing could be a real resource in that community. And so how to kind of shift from one model to the other model, and then other services that are available when needed as well. Are there any final questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. And we will send a follow-up video recording. And I'm sorry, it might be a little wonky. So if forgive that version of it, but you can share it with other staff who was unable to be here. I know that several, did write in to say that they wouldn't be able to be here last minute. And so we'll share it out with them as well. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you and everything you do.
Thank you, Ava, for having us. I'm going to just drop an email in the chat here briefly. If anyone has questions, reach out.
Yeah. Okay, and mine is also on there.